Someone had been following me since Aurenfall. Someone I trusted. How long she had known, and what she had decided to do with that knowledge, I did not yet have answers to either question. There was also a professional collector with a 3-day window. Organized. Patient. The kind of person who doesn't need to want you dead to make you disappear. And a library. Records of the ones who came to Glyth before me. What happened to them? Why none of them made it? And underneath all of it, one question I hadn't been able to answer since White Mountain. If I told them everything, would they stay? The Adventurers Guild in the morning felt like a different building. Same stone. Same carved sign above the door. Same notice boards flanking the entrance. But now, it was full. Voices layered together. Movement everywhere. People moving with purpose. Fast. Efficient. Like they were trying to finish this part quickly, so they could get back to something that mattered more. Lyra moved through it, like she belonged there. No hesitation, no searching. She already knew where to go, which counter, in what order. She went to the transaction desk first, produced the goat skin, and handled the exchange quickly. I didn't catch every detail, but I saw enough. Crown marks changed hands, and she pocketed them without counting, like she already knew the number was right. Then she moved to the contract board. I stood beside her and read it, or tried to. Most of it didn't mean much to me yet. Terms I didn't recognize, places I hadn't heard of, creatures I couldn't picture. It felt like reading a language I only partially understood. So I watched her instead. Her eyes moved down the board, fast, precise. She didn't read everything. She filtered, decided, moved on. Like she had done this enough times to know what mattered and what didn't. She stopped at one contract, read it once, then again, then took it from the board. She showed it to me. Veldmole contract, posted by a village called Tessin. Half a day along the lake road. Grain storage. Standard removal. She explained it simply, like she expected me to follow. They show up near water, follow weakness and structures. The way water finds its way through anything that isn't solid enough. Hard to catch, unless you already know where they're staying. Otherwise, you wait. 3 nights, sometimes 5. She told me the pay, 40 crown marks on completion. I asked if she wanted company. She looked at me, the kind of look that comes when someone has already decided and is just handing the choice back to you. Your call, she said. I won't be offended either way. I thought about it for a moment. Then, I'll come. She almost smiled. That brief, warm one. Gone as quickly as it appeared. We left for Tessin. The lake road was well maintained from what I could see. Trade traffic had worn it into something even and predictable. The kind of surface that only happens when enough people have walked the same path for long enough. The lake stayed in view most of the way, broad, silver in the morning light. the far shore still just a darker suggestion against the sky. Boats moved across it, small ones, fishing craft mostly, moving at a pace that felt unhurried, like their work depended on what the lake allowed, not what they wanted to take. Langervenn receded behind us. I was aware of the registration card in my jacket pocket, the inside one, the one from Earth that still closed properly. 3 days of buffer. I had already spent 2. The arithmetic was not particularly comforting. Lyra talked as we walked. Told me about a contract she had taken 2 years ago. Another lake, another village. A veldmole that hadn't followed the rules she expected. It had settled inside the wall of a working inn, not a storage building, not outside, inside. She told it like it was a story she had already made peace with, kept the inconvenient parts out, left the parts that were almost funny. The innkeeper had not agreed. I asked her how they found structural weakness, whether they sensed it or learned it. She answered without hesitation. Instinct, like water finding the lowest point. They don't choose it, they just go there. Tessin was smaller than I expected. Maybe 15, 20 buildings at most, gathered around a central well in a way that felt less planned and more accumulated. The kind of place that made sense just enough for people to stay. The elder met us at the edge of the village, a woman who looked like she had been dealing with the same problem for longer than she had planned to. She didn't explain much, just led us to the grain storage. The building sat slightly apart, stone foundation, timber frame, a roof that had been repaired more than once, by different hands, with different levels of skill. It held together, but not cleanly, not evenly, not the way something does when it's still whole. Lyra checked the outside first, moved around it with the kind of efficiency that came from repetition. Entry points, gaps, roofline. Nothing obvious. She said they needed to check inside, and went in. I stayed outside and looked at the building. Not for anything specific, just reading it. The way it carried weight, how the load moved through the structure, the slight lean of the eastern wall, barely visible, but there. The kind of thing you only notice if you know what straight is supposed to look like. And then, I saw something that wasn't in the wall at all. The foundation on the northern side had shifted. Not enough to draw attention, not in a single day, but over time, small changes, stacking, becoming something. A gap, not visible unless you knew what to look for, running along the base, long enough, wide enough. I went inside. Lyra looked up. I told her to show me the northern wall. She didn't ask why, just moved. I crouched, ran my hand along the junction, and found it. A gap. Narrow. Consistent. The kind of space something could use, if it was built for it. I told her, it's not coming from outside. It's coming through here. She looked at the gap, then at me. That's not standard, she said. They come from outside, every time. I shook my head. The foundation shifted, slow, over years. To it, this isn't a gap, it's a tunnel. It didn't find a weakness, it followed one. She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Where is it now?" I stood, looked at the wall again. Not at the surface, at the structure behind it, where the weight settled, where space opened, where heat would gather. I walked a few steps, stopped, placed my hand against the timber. Here, inside the wall. It comes through the floor, moves along the base, stays here, warmest point, least disturbance. She looked at me, not briefly, properly, then reached into her pack. She removed the boards carefully. 1, 2, 3. No wasted movement, no sound. Inside, a pale shape shifted. Flat head, small eyes adjusting to the light. A Veldmole. It looked at us. We looked at it. What followed was quick, precise, final. When it was over, the problem was gone, and the wall needed to be put back together. Outside, Lyra looked at me. For longer than usual. In 6 years, she said. I've never had anyone find one like that. From outside. I shrugged slightly. The structure was wrong, that's all. She didn't answer immediately. Her tail went still. Not empty. Thinking. Processing. Then, "I'll collect the fee. We'll talk on the road." She walked off toward the elder. I stayed and looked at the building again. I looked at the slight lean in the wall, the foundation that had been shifting for years, quietly, unnoticed, while people walked past it every day. I wondered what it said about me, that this was how I saw things. I didn't have an answer, so I put it where I put everything else that didn't have one yet, and followed Lyra. We left Tessin with 40 crown marks in hand, the light already starting to shift as the sun lowered toward the horizon. For the first stretch of the road, Lyra said nothing. That was unusual enough that I noticed it immediately. Silence with her in it never felt empty. But this was different. This was deliberate. She was thinking. I had learned to recognize that. After a while, she spoke. "What you did back there, that's not builders' work." She said it plainly. Builders know how structures are made. But you read it, like it was telling you something. I answered simply, "I have a good eye for structural problems." She shook her head slightly. "That's not what that was." I didn't answer that. And she didn't push. That was also Lyra. She said what she saw, made it clear she had seen it, and then left it there. No pressure, no pretending it hadn't happened, just space for me to decide whether I would step into it. We walked in silence after that. The lake stretched beside us, golden in the late light. Slow, unhurried. Langervenn visible in the distance, its buildings catching the sun, its docks dark against the water. I thought about Faelwyn's warning, about the kingdom, about what happened to people whose abilities became visible to the wrong eyes. I thought about the card in my pocket, 3 days, and the collection someone had filed before I even reached the gates. I thought about the bracelet on my wrist, and still, I said nothing. I didn't say anything, but something had shifted between us. She knew something was different. I knew she knew, and neither of us had decided what to do with that yet. The road curved along the lake, and the forest closed in around us. Older trees, taller, their canopy pulling the light down into something dimmer, cooler. The air changed. The sound of the lake faded behind us, replaced by something quieter, more contained. Something about it felt wrong. Lyra's ears moved, not the small adjustments I had learned to ignore, both of them, forward, focused. Her hand shifted toward the pouch at her shoulder, slow, ready. She didn't stop walking or change her pace at all as she spoke quietly without looking at me. There are people ahead, both sides. Keep walking. Don't look up. I kept walking, didn't look up, but something in the air had already shifted. The kind of silence that isn't empty, just waiting. 7 figures stepped onto the road, not guild hunters, nothing organized about them. Rougher, opportunistic, the kind that work between cities and wait for travelers coming back from somewhere. Because coming back usually means carrying something. Their leader stepped forward, broad, steady, a practical sword, and the expression of someone who had done this enough times that it no longer asked much from him. Put the packs down, the coin too. Walk away. He said it like he was offering something reasonable. Lyra didn't move, didn't reach for anything. I watched her instead, the way her eyes moved, counting. Front, sides, rear. 7 total. And then, something in her shifted. Not hesitation, decision. She moved, not toward the closest, not toward the flanks, straight at the leader. Fast, low, 3 steps, and she was already behind him. Moonclaw drawn, pressed cleanly against his throat. No wasted motion, no warning, just control. The others froze, the leader froze. Everything locked in place, exactly as she intended. For a moment, it held. And then something broke it. Something hit my left shoulder, hard enough to spin me halfway around and drop me to one knee. My hand moved before I understood. An arrow, angle high, from above. Archers, in the trees. Lyra hadn't seen them. I hadn't seen them. Then, something moved in the trees, too fast to track. A scream broke from tree line, sharp, cut short. Then another sound, quieter, final, and then nothing. The men on the road looked at each other, then at their leader, then toward the trees, where their advantage had been. The calculation wasn't complicated. Lyra's voice came from behind the leader, steady, controlled. "Your archers are gone," she said. "The next decision you make decides whether you leave this road tonight." One of them dropped his weapon. The sound carried, then another, then all of them, one after the other, like the outcome had already been decided. I was still on one knee. The arrow sat in my shoulder, not deep enough to kill, but deep enough to matter. My arm was already starting to protest, loudly. I looked at the tree line, and this time, I didn't need Lyra to tell me. We weren't alone out here. She stepped out of the trees with almost no sound at all. The kind of movement that didn't draw attention unless you were already looking for it. Each step placed cleanly, precisely. Like silence was something she understood and worked with. She was holding an arrow, not one of hers. She looked at the road, the 5 men, Lyra behind their leader, me on one knee, the arrow in my shoulder. Her eyes found me last. I looked back, and the recognition came quietly. Not relief, not surprise, just alignment. Like something slightly off, settling into place. She crossed the road to me without hesitation, crouched, and examined the arrow. Not the surface, the angle, the depth, the position relative to the joint. Nothing in her expression changed. It never did. "This needs to come out before the muscle tightens," she said. "It will hurt." Same tone, same weight. I nodded slightly. "I understand." She looked at me for a moment. Something moved across her face. Brief, contained, and gone. Lyra moved in beside us, fast but controlled. She had already released the leader. He had chosen to leave and was continuing to make that choice. Lyra looked at Faelwyn. Faelwyn looked back. No words, just assessment. Clean, direct. Lyra's ears forward, her tail still. Not hostility, calibration. I spoke because neither of them would. Faelwyn, Lyra. Lyra spoke first. The work in the trees was good. She said it simply, like stating something obvious. Faelwyn answered, "It was necessary, nothing more." But not dismissing it either. Lyra shifted her focus to my shoulder. "It needs to come out. Do you have supplies?" Faelwyn reached into her cloak, produced a small kit. Clean, organized, used. The remaining men were still on the road, uncertain, waiting. Lyra looked at them over her shoulder. "You have until we're done here," she said. "Then I decide if I still have patience for you being here." No anger, no emphasis, just certainty. That was enough. They left, quickly. The leader had already gone. The others followed. We moved off the road and into the trees on the opposite side from where the archers had been. Far enough that we couldn't be seen from the road. Close enough to the lake that the sound of water carried through the dark. Faelwyn chose the spot. She didn't explain it, just moved, and we followed. Lyra built the fire, small, contained, just enough to see by. She had it going quickly, faster than usual. I noticed that. The way her movements tightened slightly, focused, like she was putting something into the work instead of letting it sit. Faelwyn crouched beside me and examined the arrow before she touched it. Her eyes following the angle, the depth, the position against the joint. "This needs to come out now," she said, "before the muscle tightens around it. It will hurt." She said both things the same way. I nodded. "I understand." She told me to hold still, not as a request, just information. I held still. When she pulled it free, the pain was immediate, sharp, clean, and then gone. She worked quickly after that, cleaning, packing, binding, each movement precise, nothing wasted, nothing extra. Her hands were careful, more careful than the task strictly required. I noticed that and put it aside with the other things I wasn't ready to examine yet. When she sat back, Lyra was across the fire, watching both of us. Not quietly, not idly, watching, like she was putting something together, deciding what it meant. I looked at Faelwyn. She looked back. I asked one question. "How long have you been following me?" She didn't answer immediately. Not hesitation, precision. "Since Aurenfall," she said. I nodded. Didn't ask anything else. She didn't add anything. The fire shifted between us, small, steady. The lake moved somewhere beyond the trees, unhurried, indifferent. Lyra looked between us, and for once, didn't step into it. She saw something, understood enough of it, and chose to leave it alone. That was new. I noticed that too. Tomorrow, I thought. Whatever this was, the questions belonged to tomorrow. Tonight, I was still here. The arrow was gone. Lyra was beside me. Faelwyn was here. And for now, that was enough for tonight. We didn't go back to Langervenn that night. The decision settled on its own. I couldn't make the walk with a fresh wound and a left arm that had already made its position clear. And neither of them suggested I try. Lyra added a little more to the fire, just enough, then produced food from her pack. Efficient, uncomplicated. She handed it to me first, then to Faelwyn. Faelwyn accepted it with a small nod and ate the way she did everything. Measured, deliberate. We ate, and the silence between us was not empty, just layered. My shoulder ached steadily, not sharp anymore, just present, doing what it needed to do. My right hand rested on my knee, steady. I noticed that, the way I always did, and found I was getting tired of noticing it. Lyra stood and took first watch without saying anything. She moved to the edge of the firelight and was simply there, ears tracking the forest, not as a task, as a state. Failwind stayed across from me, still composed, her attention drifting in my direction from time to time. Not watching, not ignoring, something in between. Then she looked at Lyra and spoke, quietly, without lead-in. "You were good company for him on the road." Lyra turned slightly, considered her, then answered, "He was good company too. I found him on a mountain road, not eating, not going anywhere. Seemed like a reasonable place to start." Something shifted at the edge of Failwind's expression, barely there, the suggestion of something that might have been a smile, if she allowed it. Failwind spoke again, quieter this time. "I'm glad he wasn't alone on the road." Lyra held her gaze for a moment, then turned back toward the trees and said nothing more. Like she understood what had been said and chose not to press it further. I closed my eyes. The fire settled into embers. The lake moved somewhere beyond the trees. Arden low in the sky. Pale. Steady. Aaliyah rising after. Smaller. Warmer. Adding light where there had been only silver. I was aware of Failwind still there. Not sleeping. Just present. I woke once. The fire almost gone. Lyra somewhere at the edge of the trees, moving. Quietly. Failwind where she had been, back against a tree, eyes open, catching the light of both moons. She noticed me wake. Said nothing. I said nothing. Then I closed my eyes again. Some things didn't need to be understood tonight. I knew she had been following me since Aurenfall, that she had seen enough to decide to act, and that Lyra had seen enough to know something about me had changed. 2 conversations. Still open. Still waiting. 2 people across a dying fire, each holding something I hadn't fully understood yet. Tomorrow, I thought, the questions would still be there, exactly where I left them. The embers pulsed once, then again. The lake moved, and I slept. The fire had burned down to cold ash. The air still carried a trace of smoke, faint, fading. Failwind was already awake, or had never fully been asleep. She sat against the same tree, posture unchanged, eyes open, moving slightly as she read the forest. She noticed me wake and said nothing. Lyra was asleep, completely. The kind of sleep that comes when the body decides first, and the mind doesn't get a say. Her ears still moved now and then, small adjustments, Something distant, assessed, dismissed. Even asleep, still working. I looked at the ash for a moment, then at Phaelwyn. She was already looking at me. I spoke quietly. How long before someone acts on the board? She didn't answer immediately. Not hesitation, precision. Then, this morning, before midday, she said, a collector who filed properly and waited 3 days wouldn't wait longer than necessary. They would move where you're expected to be. The inn. We weren't there. That bought us time. Not much. The wound from the arrow in my shoulder wasn't as sharp as it had been last night. Still there, but manageable. I turned to Lyra and woke her. She was on her feet in seconds. No confusion, no delay, just movement. She checked the moonclaw without breaking the motion, noted to Phaelwyn, noted my shoulder, and chose not to comment on either, which said enough. We didn't discuss it further. We moved. The lake road was quiet in the early morning. Trade traffic hadn't started yet. The lake was silver to our left, moving with the unhurried patience it always had, completely indifferent to our timeline. The three of us fell into the configuration that had arrived without discussion somewhere between the forest and Langervenn. Lyra slightly ahead, reading the road. Phaelwyn slightly behind and to the right, reading everything else. Me in the middle, reading both of them. We had walked, perhaps 20 minutes, when I told Phaelwyn, without looking at her, watching the road ahead, I knew you had gone back to Aurenfall. How did you know? She asked. I told her it was the only thing that made sense. She had said she had business to finish, and the most logical business for someone who had been watching me since Sylvan Forest was to return to the last place I had been and read what I left behind. She took a moment. Then, yes, she said. I went back. I asked what she found. 2 bodies, she said. Then she named them. Edrin, Corin. She said both names with the same measured weight, but they didn't carry the same meaning. The road continued. A water bird landed near the edge of the lake. Standing there, considering the water, with the kind of patience that didn't need to hurry. Lyra said something to it as we passed. Not to us, to the bird. Brief, casual, like ignoring it would have been impolite. It didn't respond. She didn't expect it to. I noticed that and put it aside. I told Phaelwyn what Corin was. Not the whole story, just the shape of it. A child who survived by moving through the gap systems left behind, who made uneven knots and trusted they would hold, who died because Edrin chose an arrangement over a person, and I was standing there when it happened. I told her what Edrin was, the arrangement, the transit post, the collection board. She listened without interrupting, then asked, "Did you understand at the time that it was connected to something larger?" I told her no. I understood it afterward. Too late to matter. She nodded once and said nothing more. but something in her silence had changed. Like she had been holding something without knowing what filled it. And now she did. Lyra was slightly ahead, not turning around, but her tail lowered once, briefly, then returned to its normal position. She had noticed too. We entered the city from the lake roadside, not the main gate. Lyra knew, a smaller entry point, used it, without explaining how she knew it, and the guard there was less attentive than the main gate, in a specific way that secondary entrances always are. The city was already in full operation, the layered noise of a place that doesn't pause for anyone's problems. I said quietly, as we moved through the market district, that going to the inn was exactly what a professional collector would anticipate. Lyra said we weren't going to the inn. She led us to a narrow building, 2 streets back from the lakefront, older than everything around it, slightly sunken into the ground, as if the city had grown up around it rather than including it. A contact of hers, someone who rented rooms without registration, someone who had been useful to guild hunters, who needed to be in a city without being findable in it. The room was small, one window facing a wall, functional, anonymous, the kind of place that existed specifically to be unremarkable. Phelan examined it the way she examined everything, for exits, angles, risk. She chose where to stand near the window. This told me she approved without her saying so. We set our packs down. For a moment, all 3 of us were in the same small room, and none of us were moving. And the city was outside. And the collection board was somewhere in Langervenn's official channels. And the 3-day pass had either already expired or was expiring. As we stood there, I looked at Lyra. I didn't build toward it. I didn't find a careful way in. I simply told her, directly, the way she preferred things, that what happened in the Tessin storage building was not builder's knowledge. She looked at me. Her expression said she already knew this, had known it since the road back from Tessin and the door she had left open and hadn't closed. I told her that when I arrived in this world, I had no skills beyond what I knew from my previous life. Architecture, structural analysis, the ability to read how things were built and where they would fail. She asked, quietly, without any performance, what previous life? And there it was, the thread she pulled without knowing she was pulling it. I told her I was not from Glyth. She was quiet. Her ears didn't move. Her tail was still. She was processing this the way she processed things that mattered, completely, without rushing. She asked where I was from. I told her I didn't have a name for it that would mean anything to her. Another world, a different one. I arrived in Sylvan Forest through something I didn't choose and couldn't explain. The crack, Phelan said quietly, from her position near the window. Both of us looked at her briefly. She didn't elaborate, but the word landed, with the weight of something that had been known, expected, even long before I arrived in it. Lyra looked at Phelan, then back at me. Something moved across her face, Not shock, recalibration. She was updating everything she had built about me. Since a mountain road where she woke up, to find a stranger feeding her with his own packed meal. She asked about the skill, the structural reading, the Tessin building. I told her it arrived when I did. It didn't exist the way it does now before I came through. Or if it did, it was ordinary, professional, the competence of someone who understood buildings. In Glyth, it became something else, something I still didn't fully understand. She asked if it applied to people. I was quiet for a moment. Yes. I told her it applied to people. She held my gaze. Then she asked, with the specific directness that was entirely Lyra, no cushioning, no softening, if that was how Edrin died. Yes, I told her. One pressure point, the junction beneath the jaw. I saw it, and my hands moved before I decided anything. Her eyes went wide. Not fear, not horror, something more specific. The particular shock of someone who has just understood the distance between what they thought they knew and what they actually know. She had understood I was unusual. She hadn't understood I was this. I told her it happened by accident. I told her I didn't know I could do it until I did it, and I had been trying to understand what that meant about me ever since. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, and this was not a question I expected, if it frightened me. I told her yes. Not the ability itself, the ease of it. The fact that it felt like solving a structural problem rather than ending a life. She nodded slowly, absorbed this. Then she crossed the room. She put her arms around me. Brief, no ceremony. Her chin somewhere near my shoulder. Her fox ears close to my jaw. The hug of someone whose body responded before their social filter caught up. Not romantic, not calculated, just present. Completely, entirely present. The way Lyra was present with everything. I went very still. She stepped back after a few seconds and looked at me directly with those warm brown eyes that never performed anything they didn't mean. I have been following a man who found me half-conscious on a mountain road and stopped when he didn't have to, she said. I don't intend to stop because he turned out to be more complicated than I initially assessed. Considerably more complicated. Something loosened in my chest, small, involuntary. I filed it in the place where I put things I wasn't ready to examine yet. Phaelwyn, by the window, had been listening to all of this. She said nothing, but the quality of her silence had shifted into something that was almost, not quite, relief. The collection board hadn't gone away while we were talking. I raised it practically, without drama. The 3-day pass had expired, or was expiring. A professional collector knew my registered name, my registered trade, my registered inn. We needed to either leave Langervenn or find a reason the collection board became significantly harder to act on. Lyra immediately began calculating road options. Which direction? how fast, whether the collector would anticipate north or south. Failwind spoke. She told us she could resolve the collection board without leaving Langervenn. Both of us looked at her. She explained with the economy of someone delivering information they had already fully processed, that her family name carried specific weight in the context of the human-elf peace treaty, that a trade city whose commercial existence depended on peace treaty stability did not want to be seen acting against someone traveling under her escort, that she could make her presence in Langervenn and her association with me known to the right person in the city's institutional structure in a way that made the collection board politically inconvenient to act on. Not impossible, not permanently blocked, but inconvenient enough for long enough to buy us real time. I asked what it cost her. She looked at me for a moment. That specific look, silver eyes, brief, containing considerably more than its surface area suggested. She told me it cost her visibility. Her presence in Langervenn would be known. People would know she was here and who she was with. That had implications she was prepared to manage. I asked if she was certain. I would not have offered it otherwise, she said. Lyra looked between us. Then she told Failwind directly, warmly, with the genuine appreciation she never performed, that she could not have done that for me, that her guild registration didn't carry that kind of weight. Failwind acknowledged this with a brief nod. We had a plan. We were staying in Langervenn. I didn't go with her. This was Failwind's domain. Political, institutional. The specific kind of power that operated through presence and name rather than skill or force. I would be a liability in that conversation, not an asset. Lyra went instead. Not into the meeting, outside it, positioned where she could read the situation and respond if something went wrong. Not waiting, positioned. There was a difference, and Lyra understood it instinctively. I stayed in the room. I opened the journal. I sat with the open page for a while, without writing anything. Then I tried to describe what it felt like to tell Lyra the truth, and have her respond the way she responded. I got 3 sentences in and stopped because the sentences weren't doing what I wanted them to do. I closed the journal. I looked at the window, at the narrow strip of city visible between the buildings, at the edge of the lake just barely visible at the end of the street. I thought about Failwind, about what she was doing right now, and what it cost her, and why she offered it without being asked. I thought about the word, the crack, the way she said it. 2 words carrying the weight of something expected, something known before I arrived in it. I didn't have the full shape of what that meant yet, but the outline was beginning to form at the edges of my understanding. I picked up the charcoal stick. I drew my own hands, the bracelet still there. Then I drew Corin's. I looked at both sketches for a long time. Then I turned the page. Failwind returned with Lyra in the early afternoon. The meeting had worked. Not completely. Nothing political works completely, but sufficiently. The collection board against me had been flagged as politically sensitive in the context of ongoing peace treaty relations. Any collector acting on it within Langervenn's jurisdiction now risked creating an institutional incident that the city's guild leadership would prefer to avoid. It didn't make me safe. It made me less convenient to act against. In a city that ran on convenience and commerce, that was enough. I asked how long. Long enough, Phalewin said, to do what needs doing and leave properly rather than running. I accepted this. It was the most honest answer available. Lyra set something down between us. A rough paper wrapping, slightly darkened where oil had soaked through. She opened it, pulling out skewers of meat still warm. Bought it on the way back, she said. Street stall near the lake. There was a line. She handed portions to both of us without ceremony. Me first, then Phalewin, who received it with a brief nod, and began eating with the measured deliberateness that was simply how she did everything. I looked at it for a moment. Meat, skewered, charred along the edges, glistening slightly where the fat had settled. I took a bite. I couldn't place it. Not beef, not goat, not anything I had eaten before. It was soft, richer than I expected, the kind of meat that didn't resist. I glanced at Lyra. What is this? She looked back at me, then at the skewer. Meat, she said. From what? I asked. She shrugged slightly. Something that used to move, she said. If you can chew it, it's safe enough. I didn't have a better answer than that, so I ate. We ate in the small, anonymous room with the window facing a wall. The meal wasn't silent, not exactly. Lyra filled the space the way she always did. Small comments, half-finished observations, things that didn't need answers. Phalewin responded when it mattered, briefly, precisely, and I listened. The quiet was still there, underneath it, but it wasn't empty anymore. A small creature, something rodent-adjacent, pale, with oversized ears, appeared briefly at the gap beneath the room's door. It assessed us, decided we were not interesting, and began to leave. Lyra said something to it quietly, a greeting, completely casual, as if it would have been strange not to. The creature paused, looked at her with its oversized eyes, then disappeared under the door. Phalewin watched this without expression. I watched Lyra. She noticed me watching and looked back with the expression of someone who sees nothing unusual in what they just did, which, for Lyra, there wasn't. I asked her, carefully, because I genuinely wanted to understand why she talked to animals she couldn't understand. She considered this with the seriousness she brought to questions that deserved it. Then she told me they were there. It seemed rude not to say something. I had no answer for that. But something about it, the complete, uncomplicated naturalness of it, loosened something in me that had been tight since Aurenfall. As the light began its afternoon shift, the practical questions surfaced. We were staying in Langervenn, but for how long? And for what purpose? I raised it not as a crisis, but as a structural question. We had time. What did we do with it? Lyra said she wanted to take another guild contract. She needed income. The Veldmola 40 crown marks and the goatskin sale weren't indefinite. Faelwyn said she needed to send a communication. She didn't say to whom. Neither of us asked. I told them I wanted to go to the library. Both of them looked at me. I explained there was a library in Langervenn. I had seen it when we entered the city. Not the Aurenfall library, smaller, but connected to the same guild knowledge network. I wanted to read about outworlders, about the history of them in Glyph, about what they had been and what they had done, and what had happened to them. Faelwyn looked at me with the specific quality of attention that filed everything. Lyra asked, carefully, with genuine concern rather than caution, if I was sure I wanted to know. I told her I was already living it. I would prefer to understand it. She nodded, accepted this completely. That was Lyra. She didn't argue with someone else's need to understand their own situation. Faelwyn said nothing, but she didn't tell me not to go, which from Faelwyn was its own kind of answer. Later, the city quieter outside, the light going amber and long through the narrow window gap. Lyra asked what my world was like. Casually, between the end of eating and the beginning of the evening. The way she asked things she actually wanted to know, without ceremony, without making it larger than it was. I thought about how to answer that. I told her it was loud, that there were more people in a single city than in all of Glyph I had seen so far, that the buildings were tall enough to block the sky, that there was only one moon. She considered this with genuine seriousness, the way she considered everything that deserved it. Then she told me, one moon sounded lonely. I looked at her. I told her I had never thought about it that way before. She shrugged, the easy shrug of someone who has said a true thing and doesn't need it to be more than that, and looked back at the window. Faelwyn, across the room, was watching the narrow strip of sky visible between the buildings. The two moons were becoming visible as the light faded. Arden, broad and pale. Aaliyah, smaller, touched with a soft rose-amber glow. She said nothing, but something at the corner of her mouth suggested she had heard. It was late, the kind of late where the city had already started to quiet down. Lyra was asleep, completely, immediately, without transition. Her breathing even, her ears still moving occasionally, still reading the world even in sleep. Faelwyn was at the window, not watching exactly, present. The two moons reflected faintly in her silver eyes. I sat on the edge of my bedroll with the journal open. I looked at the bracelet on my left wrist. The bandage from the arrow wound had been changed this afternoon. Faelwyn had changed it, with careful hands, more careful than the clinical task required. The bracelet was visible just below the clean white binding. The rough cord, the uneven knots. Still strong, exactly as promised. I thought about saying Corin's name out loud this morning on the lake road, about how different it felt to say it to another person versus carrying it alone on an empty mountain road in the white. I thought about what Lyra said. One moon sounds lonely. I thought about Faelwyn's offer this morning, what it cost her, why she made it without being asked. I thought about the hug. Brief, genuine, completely unperformed, and the specific quality of stillness it had produced in me. The kind of stillness that arrives not from shock, but from something unexpected and warm, landing in a place that had been braced for something else entirely. For a moment, I thought about another night, a different one, a sky that only ever held one moon, and the difference between something that was real and something I only thought was. I let that go. I didn't have answers for any of it. I had the questions, clearly shaped now, which was further than I had been yesterday. I opened the journal to a clean page. I wrote. Not one line this time, more than one, but the last line was the one that mattered. I think I might not have to survive this world alone. I looked at it for a moment. Then I closed the journal. Phaelwyn, by the window, had not moved. But something in the set of her shoulders was different than it had been an hour ago. Something that had been held with deliberate precision had eased, fractionally, barely perceptibly, in the way that things ease when they have been carrying something for a long time and have been given, briefly, permission to set it down. I lay back, closed my eyes. The lake moved outside, Arden and Aaliyah still visible above the city. Sleep came, not before the moons moved, but not long after. The Langervenn library was smaller than the one in Aurenfall. Not diminished, focused. Where Aurenfall's library had the broad ambition of a city that considered itself significant, this one had the particular confidence of an institution that knew exactly what it was for. Narrower shelves, denser organization, the specific efficiency of a place that served working people rather than scholars. The clerk at the entrance was a young man with the unhurried manner of someone whose job required patience above all other qualities. He looked up when I entered, assessed me briefly. The black jacket, the tunic beneath it, the general appearance of someone who didn't quite belong to any region he could identify, and asked what I was looking for. I told him historical records, unusual phenomena, boundary anomalies. He pointed me toward the institutional history section without comment. Third row from the back, left side. The records connected to the Guild Knowledge Network from Aurenfall and beyond. I thanked him and went. The section was not prominently filed. It sat between records of unusual magical events and cartographic disputes about border territories, the kind of material that most visitors to a library would walk past without slowing. Unremarkable from the outside, the sort of filing that suggested someone, at some point, had made a deliberate choice about where this information should live. I pulled the relevant volumes and sat at a table in the back corner, where the light was sufficient and the traffic was minimal. I began to read. They were called outworlders in the older texts. In some of the more recent institutional records, the ones that showed the careful hand of someone trying to make an imprecise phenomenon fit into administrative categories, they were referred to as boundary arrivals, liminal transfers, anomalous insertions. The language changed. The phenomenon didn't. There had been others before me, Not many, but enough to constitute a pattern. Enough that someone, somewhere in the history of this world's record-keeping, had decided the phenomenon was worth documenting rather than dismissing. I read carefully, the way I read structures, not looking for the dramatic moments, but for the load-bearing details. The things that remained consistent across every record. The things that told me what was actually true, rather than what the record keeper had decided to emphasize. The first consistency. Every outworlder came from the same origin world. The descriptions varied. A world of extraordinary machines. A world without magic. A world where the sky had only one moon. But the specifics converged. They were describing Earth. My Earth. The second consistency. Every outworlder carried a skill, enhanced by glyph into something beyond what it had been before. A singer whose voice could shift perception. An artist whose drawings moved. A healer whose hands found damage in a body the way water finds cracks in stone. An accountant who understood the flow of value through systems with a precision that no native of glyph could match. And one, the most significant, the most documented, the most carefully recorded. A man whose understanding of chemical reactions became, in glyph, the ability to create perfect compounds without experimentation. Explosives, corrosive agents, toxins, things that changed the nature of warfare. I read about this one for a long time. He had been used by a human kingdom in a war. Not asked, used. A war between the human kingdoms of the interior and the elven territories to the north. The record used careful language for this, too. Not a war of conquest. A war of misaligned interests that had been building long enough that nobody remembered who started it. The record was careful about this distinction, in the way when they want to acknowledge something without stating it directly. He had been an asset, a strategic resource, a capability to be deployed. I read what happened to him. A single arrow, through the only gap in a reinforced carriage, from a distance that the record described as impossible by any conventional measure. A shot that required not just skill, but the specific intelligence of someone who had already understood where the vulnerability was before the opportunity presented itself. The archer is identified in certain elven records as Arlendir, described only as a wind-aligned marksman of noble origin. No further designation is provided. The war ended not on a battlefield, but in the moment a carriage door was closed, and a gap was identified, and a decision was made. I read that line twice. A name. One name. In a record that had been careful to name almost nothing else. I noted it, filed it in the place where I put things I couldn't yet connect to anything, but suspected I might need later. Then I read about the others, the singer, the artist, the healer, possibly taken by a kingdom. The record was incomplete, and the incompleteness itself was informative. The accountant who worked within a major kingdom's system, the record giving no indication of whether this arrangement was voluntary. I looked for the ones who had survived, the ones who had made it through without being consumed or taken or ended by a single, precise arrow. The pattern was not reassuring. The ones who survived longest had done one of two things. They had either become indispensable to someone powerful enough to keep other interested parties away, which was its own kind of being used, just with better conditions. Or they had disappeared from the record entirely, which was not the same as surviving. It was just the same as not being findable anymore. I leaned back from the table. The library continued around me. The clerk moved between shelves. Someone at the front desk was asking about navigation charts. A woman with a heavy traveling cloak was copying something from a large volume into a notebook with the focused efficiency of someone on a deadline. The world was operating at its normal pace, completely indifferent to what I had just read. I thought about Oakhaven, about Alice's warm voice and the room that locked from outside, and the city that had been built beneath its white stone and golden arches, around the systematic consumption of people who arrived looking for safety. I had been nearly one of the ones who didn't get to read about the pattern afterward. I thought about the collection board, about organized, patient, well-funded people who understood systems, who had filed paperwork before I left Aurenfall, because they had already decided what I was, before they knew anything about me, except that I existed. An asset, a resource, a capability to be deployed or eliminated, depending on which was more convenient. I thought about Phaelwyn's warning, delivered on a mountain road with the particular economy of someone who had been carrying information for a long time, and had decided the moment to deliver it had arrived. I thought about what she knew that she hadn't said, about the specific quality of her silence when certain subjects came up, about the fact that she had been in Sylvan Forest, waiting, positioned, with a specific purpose, before I arrived. I didn't have the full shape of it yet, but the outline was sharpening. I read one more thing before I closed the volumes. A fragment in the oldest section of the records, imprecisely dated, written in a hand that suggested significant age, a note rather than a formal entry. The handwriting of someone adding something to a record that was already old when they wrote it. It said, "Families who shelter outworlders sometimes disappear from subsequent records. The cause is not documented. The pattern is consistent." I looked at this for quite some time. Then I closed the volume, put it back exactly where I had found it, and sat at the table for a while longer, looking at the back wall of the Langervenn library, thinking about Lyra, about Phaelwyn, about what it meant that the two people currently closest to me were carrying a risk I had not fully accounted for when I wrote that. I might not have to survive this world alone. I had meant it as comfort. I was beginning to understand it was also a weight I was placing on people who had not been asked whether they wanted to carry it. I left the library as the midday light was doing its flattest work on the city, the hour when Langervenn's stone caught the sun directly and gave it back without warmth. I walked back through the market district slowly, not because I was tired, because I was thinking. And thinking at full capacity required my feet to operate independently of my mind. A cat sat on a low wall beside the fish market, gray, patient, watching the movement of the market with the specific attention of an animal that has identified where the errors happen and intends to be present when they do. It looked at me as I passed. I almost said something to it. I didn't. But I understood, for the first time, why Lyra did. When I reached the anonymous building, 2 streets back from the lakefront. I found Lyra already returned, sitting cross-legged on the bed with a contract paper spread across her knees, reading it with the focused attention she brought to anything that required operational planning. She looked up when I entered, read my face the way she read everything, immediately, completely, filing the result. She asked if I found what I was looking for. I told her I found more than I was looking for, that there had been others before me, that the historical record of what happened to them was instructive. She set the contract paper aside, giving me her full attention, which from Lyra meant complete, unhurried presence. No part of her managing anything else simultaneously. I asked if she wanted to know what the record said. She told me yes, she wanted to know. So I told her, not everything, but the essential shape of it, the pattern, the skill amplification, the way every outworlder in the record had eventually been found by someone who decided what they were before knowing who they were, the ones who survived and how, the ones who didn't. She listened without interrupting. This was unusual for Lyra, who engaged with things directly and immediately, which told me she understood the weight of what she was receiving. When I finished, she asked, quietly, with genuine concern rather than caution, what the pattern meant for me specifically. I told her, everyone who found them eventually tried to use them. A silence. Then Lyra said, with the complete directness that was entirely her, that she was not going to use me. I looked at her. You were useful to me, she said. Different from using you. You know that. I said nothing. You find me useful too, so it's fair. She adjusted the strap of her pouch, not because it needed adjusting. I found a man on a mountain road. His feet stopped. He gave me his food. Didn't ask what I could do for him first. Just stopped. Went to me. She looked at me steadily. I'm not renegotiating that. Not for a library record, not for anything. Something in the simplicity of it, the complete absence of agenda in it, did more for me than any formal reassurance could have. Then I told her the other thing, the fragment at the back of the oldest records, about families who sheltered outworlders sometimes disappearing from subsequent records. She was quiet for a longer moment this time. Then she said, and I had been half expecting her to dismiss it, or minimize it, or tell me I was responsible for too much that I hadn't chosen. She looked at me steady. I knew this would carry risk. Before I started, this isn't new, just more specific. And I'm making the same choice, the same one I made on that mountain road when I woke up and found someone had used his own food to keep me alive. She said it without drama, without performance, just stated it. The way she stated things that were true and didn't need elaboration. I told her I needed her to know the risk was real, not theoretical. She told me she needed me to know she had already calculated it. We looked at each other for a moment. Then she picked up the contract paper and told me about the new guild assignment. Her voice returning to the practical register of someone who has said what needed saying and is now ready to move. Phaelwyn came back in the early afternoon. She set her cloak on the hook by the door, with the deliberate care she brought to everything. Each movement considered, nothing wasted, and stood for a moment in the center of the room, with the expression of someone who has completed a task they had been carrying for some time, and is now recalibrating to the absence of its weight. Something had been decided. I couldn't have named what specifically, but the quality of her presence in the room was different than it had been this morning. Something that had been held at a particular tension had shifted to a different register. She looked at me, then at Lyra, then at the contract paper on Lyra's knees. Lyra told her about the new guild assignment without being asked. She did this naturally, the way she did everything naturally, as if keeping people informed was simply good practice rather than a social decision. A contract posted that morning. A merchant in Langervenn reporting that a section of the underground storage network beneath the city had become inaccessible. Something blocking a passage. The guild had classified it as a potential creature nesting situation. Failwin listened to this, with the focused attention she brought, to information she was processing for implications rather than content. I told her what I had read in the library, the same shape of it I had told Lyra. Not everything, but the essential pattern. The outworlders, the skills, what happened to them, the fragment about families. She listened without moving. When I finished, she was quiet for the specific moment that was precision rather than hesitation. Then she said, simply, without preamble, "I knew." I looked at her. She told me she had known the history before she found me, that it was part of why she had been in Sylvan Forest, that the evaluation of what I was and what I represented had been ongoing. I asked her what the evaluation had concluded. Another pause, longer than the first. She told me the evaluation was still open, that she had not reached the final conclusion, and that she was not prepared to discuss the terms of it yet, but that she intended to, when she was certain enough to be accurate. This was Failwin being exactly who she was, honest but not open. She would say the truth, but only the portion she had finished understanding. I accepted this, not because I was entirely comfortable with it, because I understood it was the most she could offer right now, and offering it at all was itself significant. Lyra, from her position on the bed, was watching both of us with the warm, assessing expression of someone who had correctly identified that there was considerably more history in this exchange than the words conveyed, and had decided, for now, to let it exist without pulling at it. Failwin looked at the contract paper. She asked what the underground passage was built from. Lyra told her. Old stone, part of the original city foundation, predating the current surface construction by at least 2 centuries. Failwin was quiet for a moment longer than seemed warranted by the information. Then she said we should go and see it. The entrance to the underground storage network was in the lower district, near the older part of the waterfront, where the city's original foundation was closest to the surface. A guild representative met us there, a practical man with a lamp, and the resigned expression of someone whose job regularly involved taking people into places they would prefer to be somewhere else. He gave us each a lamp, explained that the passage had been in normal use until approximately 3 weeks ago, when a delivery team reported that it simply stopped. That whatever they sent in didn't return. No sounds, no indication of collapse, no creature activity that anyone could identify. Just a passage that had apparently decided to become a wall. Lyra asked him how long the passage had been part of the city's storage network. He thought about it, told her as long as anyone could remember, that these lower passages were part of the original construction. Nobody was entirely certain who had built them or when. I watched Faelwyn receive this information. Her expression didn't change, but she moved her hand to the wall beside the entrance and rested it there for a moment. The gesture of someone feeling for something rather than touching something. We went in. The underground was immediately different from the surface city. The surface Langervenn was commerce and motion, and the particular vitality of a place that ran on the movement of things. The underground was older than all of that. The stone down here had a different quality, denser, darker, laid with a technique that predated the current city's construction philosophy by enough time that the difference was visible, even to someone without my specific perception. I read the walls as we walked. The construction was sound, not aged into fragility, aged into something denser. The load-bearing elements were functioning exactly as designed, which meant they had been designed by someone who understood what they were building and built it to last. Not the rushed practicality of infrastructure, the considered permanence of something meant to endure. The passage narrowed slightly as we went deeper. The guild representative's lamp threw shadows that moved with the specific quality of underground shadows, more absolute than surface shadows, less willing to yield. Then we reached the end. It was not a collapse. I knew this within 30 seconds of looking at it. A collapse has a specific signature, the way load redistributes when a structural element fails, the pattern of debris, the direction of displacement. This had none of that. The passage ended in a wall that was composed of the same stone as the surrounding construction, fitted with the same technique, carrying load in the same way. Someone had built a wall here, not recently. The stone had the same aging as the surrounding passage, the same density, the same color, the same micro-patterns of long contact with underground air. This wall had been here for decades, long enough that it had become indistinguishable from the original construction to anyone who wasn't looking for the difference. I told Lyra this. The wall is not a collapse. It was built deliberately by someone who knew what they were doing and wanted it to look like it had always been here. She looked at the wall for a moment, then at me. Her ears were forward, tracking, assessing. I told her the technique was specific, not common current practice. Older. The kind of building approach that predated the current surface city by, I traced the stone pattern. Read the specific method of load distribution. At least 60 years, possibly more. I turned to Faelwyn. She was standing very still. Not the stillness of assessment, the stillness of recognition. Her silver eyes were moving across the wall with the specific quality of someone reading something they already know and are confirming rather than discovering. I asked her if she knew what was behind it. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said she didn't know, but she suspected. And her suspicion was significant enough that she was not willing to open it without being certain of what they would find. Lyra asked her directly, because she was Lyra, and direct was her default regardless of how significant the moment was, what she suspected. Faelwyn looked at Lyra, then at me, then at the wall. She told us that sealed passages of this age in cities along the lake road were sometimes connected to events from before the current peace treaty. That the specific building technique, she touched the wall briefly, precisely in the way she touched things, she was anchoring information through, was used in a particular period, a period she had personal knowledge of. She told us she needed time to verify something before they proceeded, that she had sent a communication, the one from this morning, partly because of this. She had suspected the passage might be connected to what she suspected when she read the contract description. Now that she had seen it, she was more certain. She was not certain enough to open it. Lyra looked at the wall for another moment. Then she looked at Phaelwyn with the warm, direct gaze she brought to everything she had decided to accept. She told her, simply, without pressure, that they would wait. I looked at the wall. 60 years, possibly more. Built by someone who understood construction well enough to make a door look like it had never been a door. Sealed from the inside. I could read this in the load pattern, the way the final stones had been set, from the interior face rather than the exterior. Someone had gone in, built the wall behind them, and not come out the way they went in, or not come out at all. I did not open it. We reported back to the guild representative, who had waited at the entrance, with the lamp and the resigned expression, that the passage was structurally sealed rather than creature-blocked, that further investigation was required, and that the contract would need to remain open pending additional research. He accepted this, with the equanimity of someone who had long since made peace with the fact that underground things were frequently more complicated than they appeared. The contract stayed open. The door stayed closed. We ate that evening in the small, anonymous room with the window facing a wall. Lyra had bought food from the market on the way back, efficiently. The practical management of hunger as an administrative problem. She handed portions without comment, and sat cross-legged on her bed and ate, with the focused attention she brought to tasks that deserved her full presence. Phaelwyn sat near the window. She ate slowly, as she always did. Measured, each movement deliberate. I sat on the edge of my bed and ate without particularly tasting anything, which I had learned was simply what happened when my mind was fully occupied elsewhere. For a while, none of us spoke. Not uncomfortable silence, the specific quiet of 3 people digesting both food and a significant amount of information from the same day, each at their own pace. After a while, Phaelwyn set her food aside and spoke. She told us, and she said it with the measured care of someone who had decided how much to say, and was giving us exactly that amount. That the sealed passage was from the war period. That the building technique was specific to a construction approach used in the decade before the peace treaty. That she did not know what was behind the wall, but that things were sealed during that period for specific reasons, and that those reasons were not always the kind that made opening them straightforward. She told us she had asked, in her communication, for information about what had been sealed in Langervenn during the war period, that she was waiting for a response, and that until she had that response, she was not prepared to recommend opening the passage. I asked her how long the response might take. She told me she didn't know. The communication had gone to someone she trusted, to be both accurate and discreet. The speed of their response would depend on what they found, not on urgency. Lyra asked, casually, between bites, in the way she asked things she actually wanted to know, whether what was behind the wall was dangerous. Phaelwyn said, possibly. She said it without drama, which was more effective than any dramatic delivery could have been. Lyra nodded, accepted this, filed it in the place where she put operational information that required acknowledgement but not immediate action. I looked at the window, at the narrow strip of city visible between the buildings, the lake edge just barely visible beyond. I thought about the wall underground, about whoever had built it from the inside, about the 60-year-old technique, about the decision someone had made to go in and not come out, or not come out the conventional way. I thought about the library, about the records I had read, about the pattern. A thought arrived that I didn't immediately share. The war outworlder had been hidden in a reinforced carriage, the record said, with only a small opening. Someone had gone to significant effort to protect him, or to contain him, in the period before someone named Arlandir found the gap. A wind-aligned marksman of noble origin. That was all the record gave. I was beginning to understand, probably all the record was ever going to give. Hiding things during a war was not unusual. Sealing things that needed to stay sealed, indefinitely, invisibly, below a city that would grow up around them without knowing they were there, was a specific kind of decision. The decision of someone who understood that some things needed to stay where they were put. I didn't say this out loud. Not yet. I filed it in the place where I put things I was still building. Later, the city quieter outside. The two moons visible in the narrow strip of sky between buildings. The day settled into its final shape. Lyra was sketching something on a piece of paper from her pack. Not words, a rough map of the underground passage layout from memory. She drew it the way she navigated roads, by remembering rather than recording. The sketch was for me, I realized. She was giving me something to work from. She handed it over without comment when she finished. I took it and added structural notes in the margins. The wall position, the building technique date range, the interior construction pattern that confirmed the ceiling direction. Phaelwyn watched us do this from near the window. Something in her expression, the ghost of something at the corner of her mouth, suggested she found this exchange worth noting. I asked Lyra what she thought the new contract was actually going to involve. She told me, with the practical assessment of someone who had been reading guild contracts long enough to read between the lines of them, that whatever was behind that wall was not going to be a creature nesting situation. That the guild representative's description of things going in and not coming back out was consistent with a space that was either actively hostile or contained something that didn't want to be found. She said this cheerfully, the way she said everything that was true and dangerous, and simply needed to be acknowledged before being dealt with. I told her that the passage being sealed from the inside suggested whoever built the wall hadn't expected anyone to need to open it from the outside. She considered this. Then she said, with the lightness she brought to observations that had weight in them, that whoever built it hadn't expected us. Phaelwyn, by the window, said nothing, but she was listening. I looked at the contract paper, at Lyra's map. at the notes in the margins that were beginning to form the outline of a structure I didn't yet have enough information to name. I thought about what Phalewyn had said in the underground, that she needed to be certain before they opened it. I thought about the communication she had sent, about whoever would respond to it, and what they would say. I thought about the fact that Phalewyn had been in Sylvan Forest before I arrived, that she had known outworlders were a variable to be evaluated, that the evaluation was still open, that she had told me this directly this afternoon, which was itself a kind of honesty that I was still finding the right category for. I thought, briefly, carefully, about the moment the arrow had crossed the air in the forest, about what Phalewyn had done before she had finished deciding. I thought about what that meant about the evaluation. I didn't have a conclusion. I had the observation, which was further than I had been this morning. It was late. The day had finally settled. Lyra was asleep. Completely. Immediately. The transition so fast, I had never once caught the moment it happened. Her map sketch was folded on her pack. Her ears moved once, then settled. Phalewyn was at the window. The two moons, Arden broad and pale, Aaliyah smaller and amber, were visible in the narrow strip of sky. She was watching something in the middle distance that the rest of us couldn't see. I opened the journal. I didn't draw structures tonight. I sat with the open page for a while, and then wrote. Not a single line this time. More than that. I wrote about the library, about the pattern, about what it meant. That the only models available to me for how this ended were the ones who had been used, the ones who had disappeared, and the ones who were still being assessed. I wrote about Lyra's response, about the complete, uncalculated absence of agenda in it, about what it felt like to tell someone a risk and have them tell you they had already calculated it and chosen anyway. I wrote about the wall underground, about whoever had built it from the inside, about what they had sealed and why, and whether the answer to both of those questions was going to matter to the three of us in a room 2 streets back from the Langervenn waterfront. I wrote about Phalewyn telling me the evaluation was still open, about the specific honesty of that, giving me the shape of a thing she couldn't yet give me the content of. Then I stopped writing. I looked at the bracelet on my left wrist, the rough cord, the uneven knots, visible below the clean bandaging from the arrow wound, which was healing properly, which was its own small data point about how things could be damaged and still continue. Still strong, exactly as promised. I thought about Corin, about saying his name in the morning light on the lake road, about how the name had sounded different out loud than it had sounded inside, less like a weight, more like a record, something preserved rather than carried. I thought about Noah. I let myself think about Noah for a moment, not the cliff, not the push, but the before. The twin who understood my silence. The person I had spent years picking up broken pieces for. The smudge on the canvas I had told myself made the picture more authentic. I found myself wondering, briefly, about what came after I was gone. Whether the absence had simplified things. Whether it had made the picture cleaner. Whether the two of them had finally become what they were always moving toward. I let the thought pass. I had been wrong about that. I closed the journal, lay back on the bed. The city was quiet outside, not silent. Langervenn didn't do silent, but the lower frequency of a place that had paused its commerce for the night. Somewhere beneath this city, behind a wall built by someone 60 years ago from the inside, something waited with the patient indifference of something that had been waiting for 60 years and had no particular opinion about waiting longer. I thought about it for a while. Then I thought about the three of us in this room, about what we had said today and what we had not said, about the specific weight of honesty and the specific weight of things still being decided. I thought about what Lyra had said. She had known traveling with unusual people carried risk before she started. She had calculated it. She was making the same choice she had made on a mountain road. I closed my eyes. The thing about structures, the thing I had understood since before I could name it, was that their integrity wasn't determined by the absence of stress. Everything that stood for any length of time had been stressed. The question was never whether the load arrived. The question was whether what you had built could carry it. The three of us had been stressed since Sylvan Forest, since White Mountain, since Aurenfall, since an arrow in a left shoulder on a road between Tessin and Langervenn. We were still standing. That was not nothing. Sleep came quietly, without negotiation. Outside, the lake moved. The two moons crossed the sky in their patient arc. And beneath the city, behind a wall that had been waiting 60 years to be relevant again, something waited.